As we head into the 2022 election, it looks like code red for American democracy. You got Democrats saying that these restrictive voting laws enacted by Republicans in 17 states are actually improperly, wrongly, unfairly suppressing the vote, particularly for Democratic constituencies like minorities, younger voters, women voters, by tougher, stricter laws on absentee voting, mail voting, early voting, easier registration, drive-by voting, 24-hour voting. And now on the other side, you've got millions of Republicans, millions, saying and believing that you can't trust the vote count because the 2020 election was stolen. Not true, false, no evidence. You've got Republican state officials in key states and 43 Republican senators, as well as an attorney general, saying, no, Joe Biden won, the vote was fair. But still they believe it. But neither side is touching the really dangerous threat to American democracy, which is an effort by some Republican strategists and some Republican lawmakers in key states to try to take partisan control of what has historically been the nonpartisan, impartial process of counting and certifying the vote. You can call it Act Two of the Big Lie, a Republican strategy to erode and override the guardrails of American democracy that have guaranteed fair elections and fair vote counts for centuries, a couple of centuries. It's an echo of what Trump was trying to do in the final month of his presidency. He was frantic, desperately at war with American constitutional democracy on multiple fronts. That mob riot, that attack on Congress as it was certifying the popular vote, the peaceful transition of power on January 6, 2021, is just the most visible part of the plot. Behind the scenes, Trump was putting intense pressure on his own Republican acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen to declare vote fraud in Georgia and other states. And when Rosen refused, said there was no evidence of that, Trump was ready to replace him with a Trump loyalist who was ready to do what Trump wanted, and he was only stopped by the threat of top Justice Department attorneys and his own White House attorneys to resign if he carried through. But anyway, Trump went ahead and he called Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, and told him find 11,780 votes so that Trump could be the winner in the state of Georgia. Again, Raffensperger, no evidence, and he refused. So Trump went ahead and he got an attorney, John Eastman, to brief Vice President Mike Pence in the Oval Office a couple of days before Congress convened to certify the electoral vote and lay out a step-by-step game plan for Pence to just simply say he would not accept, as vice president, the electoral votes of states where Biden had won, swing states like Georgia and Arizona and Pennsylvania and others, and simply declare Trump the winner. Thankfully, constitutional Republicans committed to the Constitution instead of to their party, refused to go along. Vice President Pence, Secretary of State Raffensperger, Acting Attorney General Rosen, Republican supervisors in Maricopa County, Phoenix, Arizona, Republicans in Michigan on the election board. They all protected the sanctity of the American electoral system, and it survived the Trump storm. But what's underway now is a replay, an echo, a mirror of that Trump strategy to erode and override the guardrails that protect the sanctity, the purity, the impartiality of the American vote count. You've got Republican legislators, lawmakers in a half a dozen states that are trying to challenge and change the individuals, the processes, the mechanisms, the machinery of elections. So if it gets to a bad popular vote for them, they can disqualify the vote and override the public vote and declare Republicans the victor. Take a look at Georgia. The Republican legislature in Georgia, Republican majority, passes a sweeping voting legislation, not just limiting the access to the vote, but throwing out Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State, who defied Trump as chairman of the State Board of Elections and putting in their own nominees, and then giving the State Board of Elections the power to step into any county in the state of Georgia and remove members of its county board of elections if they want. Already the State Board in Georgia has started an investigation of the county board in Fulton County, which is Atlanta, the Democratic stronghold, and Democrats say this is step one of a takeover by the state of county votes in Atlanta, which could affect the Senate elections in Georgia and everything else in Georgia in 2022. Similar moves are underway in other states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Texas, Arizona. What they want to do is assert the authority of the state legislature to step in and validate, certify, or invalidate and override the popular vote. Out there in Arizona, they had an investigation by a commercial firm called the Cyber Ninjas, run by an openly pro-Trump CEO, to check into the vote. In the end, they came out and said, well, Biden won after all. But they've got the precedent to say we can step in next time and change the vote. Same thing in these other states. Beyond that, you've got Republicans committed to the Trump version of the big lie. 2020 election was stolen, running in 10 states to become Secretary of State, which is the key office in most states for running elections. In Georgia, they got a guy named Jody Hice, a Republican congressman who voted to invalidate Biden's victory when Congress voted on January 6th. He's now running to oust Raffensperger, the Trump nemesis in Georgia, who stood up and protected the fair vote. Not until very recently have Democrats even begun to focus on this kind of problem. Their original voting reform laws didn't even deal with this. But recently, they put some provisions into the new Freedom to Vote Act, which went into the Senate very recently and got blocked by Republicans, of course. They put in provisions that would protect local election officials from being removed from office for anything other than gross negligence, not just a vote count that the legislature didn't buy. They could also file suits if they thought they were improperly removed, and this law would have made it, if it passed, a crime to interfere with, threaten, intimidate local election officials in doing their job during, before, and after elections. Another key provision is requiring all states to do paper ballots. Why? Because you can't fiddle with paper ballots. Electronic ballots are susceptible to tampering and hacking, and 12% of the ballots in 2020 were cast by electronic vote. So paper ballots are necessary. But these Democratic initiatives are going nowhere. The Republicans have got a stonewall. Their leader, Mitch McConnell, has all 50 Republicans lined up. It's a dead letter. The one place where you might see bipartisan action is in updating and modernizing the 1887 Electoral Vote Count Act, which was the act used last January by one senator, Josh Hawley of Missouri, and one representative to trigger that congressional debate in the midst of that maelstrom, that political demonstration, that attack on the Capitol, and that enormous mess. People are saying on both sides of the aisle, Republicans as well as Democrats in the Senate, saying, we got to update this. We got to raise the threshold. We got to require a quarter at least of the Senate and the House to say something's wrong before we have to have a debate. And we need to clarify what are the standards for challenging the electoral votes put forward by the states, certified by the states, tested in the courts. And the job of Congress is simply to tally the votes, count them up, and report them. That could happen. And what you know is that this is a code red issue with American voters. Voters are way ahead of the politicians on this issue. Mistrust of the electoral process, of the vote count, is spiking in America. A recent CNN poll found that 93% of Americans, 93%, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, all across the board, think American democracy is under attack or being severely tested. And slightly more than half of them are afraid that the popular vote, the sacred popular vote, we the people, is going to be overturned in future vote counts. That is an alarm bell to Congress, telling those guys and gals on Capitol Hill that we the people, the American electorate, want urgent bipartisan action to protect fair elections and an impartial, fair vote count. So get in touch with your senators and your representatives. Let people know in the next election you want an honest vote count. Stop the fiddling. And I hope you'll take a look at some of our other videos on this site by clicking on that link down there, and subscribe by clicking on that link down there. And thank you so much for being with us. Democracy matters enormously to all of us, and we have to fight for it. Thanks.